Hi folks, welcome. I recently slotted the final book in place, completing my collection of Adam Roberts' science fiction novel output. And I thought it would be a good opportunity to share his oeuvre and to show off the books a bit, to show you what the covers look like and to give you a brief overview of each book, see if they float your boat. Adam Roberts is, I think, currently 59, he'll be 60 later this year. And he's a working professor of, I think, 19th century literature, certainly English literature, and he works at the Royal Holloway College, which is part of the University of London. And he's a prolific chap. He writes learned works of scholarship in his chosen niche, and he runs 2 or possibly 3 blogs. He writes parodies, he writes short stories and novellas, and he's dabbled in historical fiction and non-fiction too. And if you follow him on Twitter, you know that he's a sharp, witty guy. Happily for us, he also writes a lot of science fiction, and it's on those that I shall focus today, specifically on the novels. Adam is highly unusual these days in largely writing standalone or singleton science fiction novels. In each, he attempts something new with very limited repetition that I've detected in my reading of his books so far. I haven't read them all. I've read probably about a quarter, I think, maybe a bit more. Not for him the winning formula to be regurgitated. He isn't tempted to follow the latest trends, and his work doesn't always land 100% perfectly. Sometimes they end a bit abruptly or just peter out, but they're always thoughtful, always clever, and always thought-provoking. This, I think, is intelligent science fiction, and it's a scandal, honestly, that he isn't garlanded with awards at this stage in the game. 23 novels down the road. In publication order then, let's start at the beginning with Salt. After 37 years of travel through space, an Earth colony ship reaches the hostile and chemically unique planet Salt. The story is narrated alternately by Petra from the anarchist Alcest Society and Barley, who's the authoritarian leader of the more capitalist hierarchical Cenarian colony. The Alcists, inspired by anarchist principles, reject ownership and hierarchy, focusing on individuality and communal living, whereas the Cenarians, with a rigid hierarchical and militaristic structure, view themselves as somehow divinely mandated to dominate and civilise the others. Senar mirrors then our capitalist democracies, with systems valuing monetary worth, rigid hierarchies and war as a means of organising society and controlling the poor old populace. Whereas Alce resembles an anarchist utopia, but is portrayed as harsh, naive and disconnected, with his own issues of rigid adherence to ideology. Barley's section feature sort of Orwellian-level doublespeak and black humour, illustrating the absurdity of Senar's justifications. And Petra's account is more earnest, but reveals the Alcists' flaws, emphasising the futility of their ideological purism. Neither Alce nor Senar are particularly appealing or even viable, importantly, in Salt's barren and unforgiving landscape, the descriptions for which have been compared rather optimistically, I suspect, to Dune. Still, I enjoyed it, and as a debut novel goes, I think it's pretty strong. If you've read Inverted World by Christopher Priest, then you'll be able to see the influence, I think, on Adam Roberts in On, which was his second novel. The story takes place on the Wall, which is an immense cliff face where gravity pulls in the wrong direction, shaping the lives of its inhabitants. Small villages cling on to the sides of the wall using rocky outcrops, wooden platforms and ladders to get around. The protagonist, Tighay, is an adolescent struggling with a harsh upbringing in one such precariously perched village. Life is also precarious. Everyone is one trip or just a shove from falling off the world, like the goat mentioned in the opening sentence. Tighay himself falls, miraculously surviving and landing far below in the midst of an army preparing for war. After recovering from his injuries and learning the army's language, Tighay is conscripted into the Air Force, which sounds grand, but is really just human-powered kites lobbing hand grenades. The campaign goes disastrously, leading to Tighay's capture by the enemy and subsequent sale into slavery. There are, of course, revelations about the sideways gravity, which to my mind reflect the similar revelations in the Christopher Priest book. In Stone, Roberts takes his first, but not last, look at a post-scarcity utopia. The Tut society, spread across low-density regions of space, is a utopia powered by advanced nanotech, or dot tech as it's called in the book. Crime is nearly non-existent due to post-scarcity conditions and the psychological screening that goes with it. The protagonist, A, is the only known murderer in this society. For his sins, literal and figurative, A is imprisoned in a unique escape-proof facility, or is it, within the plasma of a star, within a star, the interior of a star, you would think it would be pretty difficult to escape from. Stripped of his dot tech, A faces eventual death from natural causes. A mysterious voice, though, offers him freedom and wealth in exchange for completing a horrific mission. A's end of the deal is to wipe out the entire population of a planet, 60 million people, whilst leaving its infrastructure and environment intact. This mission is unprecedented in scale, and A's journey to complete it raises some obvious questions about his employers and their motives. Without the dot tech, A suffers physical and mental afflictions long eradicated from Tut society, giving him a lot of explaining to do as he goes. His deteriorating state also reawakens his sociopathic tendencies, driving him further into madness. The dot tech are an interesting aspect of the story in more than one way. They're so good at protecting and managing the safety of the individual, and there's one memorable scene where A tries to kill somebody that knows too much about them. And let's just say that the dot tech make that extremely difficult and extremely grisly in the process. The central mystery of the book is obvious and twofold. It's who has hired A to kill an entire planetary population, and why. And those questions are resolved in a satisfying way by the end of the book. So those three I've read, and then the next few I haven't. So I'm just going to be very brief and give you a vague idea of what the book is about. Polystom is set in a unique universe. It's a steampunk solar system filled with breathable air. There's no vacuum, allowing travel between planets via biplanes. So already that's a fun setting, right? The protagonist, Polystom, is a naive and entitled upper-class twit, and he's fairly hopeless, and his marriage to Beeswing, a free-spirited woman that he foolishly tries to control, is soon doomed, ended by her tragic death. I really love the sound of the setting for Polystom, and there are hints of the metaphysical to the story too, that the lines between reality and illusion may be blurred. Is it live, or is it Memorex? In the snow, it snows and doesn't stop snowing. It keeps going until the snow is miles deep and billions are dead. We follow Tira, who is a Londoner of Indian origin, and she manages to survive by just climbing whatever she can climb to get above to stay above the level of the snow. And she ends up holed up in the upper stories of a skyscraper in London bizarrely with a London Underground worker. And between the two of them, with his underground skills, they manage to tunnel for food and they survive for a while. But ultimately, she needs rescuing, and the people that rescue her are hunting and scavenging for gold at the behest of something called the New United States. So the first part of the book is a disaster survival story, and the rest of it is about how she survives and lives in this strange post-disaster society that springs up on the surface of the snow in a floating city. Again, the premise for that sounds bonkers. I'm sure it was great fun at the beginning when it started to snow and everyone had a nice time and maybe a couple of days off work, and then it quickly got deadly. We're back in space this time for Gris Hill. Uplands is an independent tax haven established in orbit by Clara and her father Miklos. Uplands is a sort of orbital redoubt for the wealthy who reject earthly governance. Clara's daughter Gris Hill emerges during the book as a political leader, advocating for a new form of anarchic nationalism, starting the journey to turn Uplands from merely independently minded into a nation in its own right. But can Uplands stay independent of Downland's political tensions? Not for long. Gris Hill takes a long look at the struggle to maintain independence in the face of blockades, attacks, and legal challenges that are in effect a proxy war. I read Land of the Headless last year, and many months later, the striking imagery is still imprinted on the back of my eyelids. We're on Plus, a planet where the writ of a fundamentalist creed holds sway, a weird mashup of evangelical Christianity and extremist Islam. The punishment for even minor infractions is severe. Our protagonist, John Kavala, is a poet, and he's tried for rape, which is really just consensual premarital sex, and sentenced to beheading. So end of story, right? No, on Plus, they preserve the mind of the condemned in a wearable computer, an ordinator, augmented so that the newly beheaded can still hear and speak. Newly headless Kavala meets a lady called Susan, a headed volunteer who helps him to adjust to his new state. And they, along with two other recently headless individuals, embark on a desert trek towards a town that apparently or allegedly is more accepting of the headless. More misunderstandings and exaggerations ensue, and John finds himself press-ganged into the army, ultimately fighting in something called the Sugar War on another planet entirely. There are further revelations and deceptions interfering with John's search for redemption. With our head containing much of what makes us, our faces, our expressions, our brains, our senses, imagining a person still able to function without their head is so strange, even if those functions are partly replaced with electronics. Splinter is the first, but not the last, obvious reference to Jules Verne in Adam Roberts' works. Splinter is based on a less well-known Verne story, Off on a Comet, which is from way back in 1877. This rather nice edition of Splinter is a numbered limited edition, which is also signed by Adam. It shouldn't exist on its own. It was originally issued in a nice slipcase with a similarly bound and numbered edition of the Verne book. But for some reason, this copy of Splinter was on its own and I bought it separately. It's a really nice edition, actually. The paper stock is really nice. And somewhere it is numbered and signed by the man himself. The protagonist is Hector Servadec, who ends up stranded on a fragment of Earth which is split asunder by a comet impact or something similar. An essential metaphor is the notion that the world might end, but we might not even notice, at least not immediately. Climate change, anyone? Delving once more into the literary past, this time borrowing from Jonathan Swift. Our jumping off point in Swiftly is that the events of Gulliver's Travels are real, factual history. And in the meantime, European imperial powers have enslaved the Lilliputians and others, exploiting them for their intricate labour in factories, with the giants providing brute strength to the military. At the time the novel is set, England is at war with France, which has allied with the Brobdingnagians to counter English imperial ambitions. To add to the fun, Roberts riffs on the Swiftian original by imagining that there are beings smaller than the Lilliputians and larger than the giants, I can't say that word, and smaller and larger to extremes, even to the kind of subatomic level, I think. Yellow, blue tibia is an English phrase that most closely mimics the Russian words for I love you, so somewhere in here is a love story. In 1946, Stalin gathers a crack force of Soviet science fiction writers, including the protagonist Konstantin, and tasks them with inventing a fictional alien enemy, a radiation-based species intended to unite humanity under communism once the pesky old Americans and their Western lackeys are defeated. But the project is abruptly cancelled, and the writers ordered to forget everything. It never happened, on pain of death. Decades later, Konstantin, now a delusioned and struggling translator, discovers that their fictional story might actually be real. Yellow Blue Tibia is part absurdist, part satirical, part X-Files mystery, and like the X-Files, apparently leaves us hanging with an ambiguous ending. What do you think of the cover art? I think that the cover art is as individual as the novels. I think they've done a really good job. I mean, while some of them are consistent in style for a while, generally speaking, I like the fact that each one is different. New Model Army is next, and this centres on Pantegral, a democratically operated mercenary army, a new model army no less, in this case hired by Scotland to fight for independence from the United Kingdom. Unlike traditional forces, NMAs operate without hierarchy, using real-time tech and collective decision-making to outmaneuver conventional militaries. Tony Block, the protagonist and the narrator, is a born soldier and a deserter from the British Army. He offers a blunt and often provocative perspective on war and democracy and human relationships, providing insights into the life of a soldier in a radically different army structure. But whilst Block thrives in combat, the horrors of war begin to erode his mental stability, and his struggles provide a personal lens through which the cost of both war and the radical nature of the NMAs are explored. Can Pantegral defeat the British Army? And if so, what next? What might such a radical organisation become? Roberts is certainly a one for an unusual starting premise, and by light alone is no exception. In this book, humanity has been genetically engineered to photosynthesize sunlight through their hair, theoretically eliminating hunger. Whilst the poor embrace this adaptation, growing their hair as long as they can, the wealthy reject it, flaunting baldness and indulging in food as a symbol of their affluence. And if I've understood correctly, then that means that I'm probably quite wealthy. Anyway, thus widens the gap between the rich and the poor. The wealthy revel in excess and leisure, whilst the poor endure labour and hardship, their subsistence on sunlight making them even more exploited. Apparently, it's a believable and detailed world that explores what impacts might result from the photosynthesis tech. And it should free us all, but Roberts foresees that it merely persists the divides that exist already: inequality, privilege and moral decay. Before we look at some more of Adam's books, is Adam Roberts on your science fiction radar? Have you read any of these books? Which is your favourite, or which do you like the sound of the most? Do let me know in the comments down below. This one would be a whodunit, but from the off we know that Jack Glass is the murderer. So this book is more of a howdunit. It's a mashup of crime fiction staples. There's a locked room mystery, a country house murder, a bit of dystopia, and more than a dash of golden age science fiction. We're in a far future solar system where humanity's survival hinges on scarce resources and exploitative labour practices. Humanity is divided into the super rich, who control the Earth, and the impoverished some polloi, who live in orbiting shanty bubbles. Labour is cheap and expendable, with prisoners used to terraform asteroids as part of their sentences. Jack Glass is a murderer, sure, but he's also the detective and protector, presented as a complex anti-hero in the book. We get 3 interconnected murder mysteries for the price of 1. And that one might be my favourite cover out of all of them. I really like it. No prizes for guessing that 20 trillion leagues under the sea borrows once again from Jules Verne. Set in 1955, the French Navy launches a brand new nuclear submarine, the Plongeur. But after an accident, or sabotage maybe, the submarine dives more deeply into the ocean than should be physically possible, leading to a series of strange and improbable events. The dynamic amongst the all-male crew is central, with tensions escalating as the submarine sinks deeper and deeper and deeper still. As they descend, they encounter increasingly bizarre phenomena. The sense of claustrophobia, of paranoia and madness grows as the depth exceeds any known oceanic measurements, and the further the submarine descends, the more reality seems to warp. Bet, or Beast, is set in a dystopian near future where the animal rights movement has injected artificial intelligence into domestic and domesticated animals. The book opens with one such smart cow asking Graham, a butcher, to Turing test it before using the bolt gun. All of which reminds me a little bit of the talking beef cow in a restaurant at the end of the universe. Anyway, the story follows Graham as he deals with this new reality of sentient animals and the fundamental changes that this brings, not only to his job, but to society at large. As you can imagine, animals becoming smart raises all sorts of deep questions about life, about death, about the nature of intelligence and consciousness, and about moral responsibilities. And Roberts uses Graham, the butcher, as our lens to explore these issues. And while some animals are sympathetic to the situation us poor humans now find ourselves in, others are not, so they're antagonistic, and there's a new power dynamic in town. Scandalously, this next book is the only one of his solo science fiction output that was not blessed with a hardback edition. I don't know what Gollancz was thinking of. The thing itself begins with two British astrophysicists, Charles Gardner and Roy Curtius, who are isolated in an Antarctic research station, where their relationship deteriorates as they argue over Roy's obsession with Kant's philosophy. Roy claims that he's applied Kant's ideas to solve the Fermi paradox, linking philosophy with the mystery of extraterrestrial life. The story then apparently incorporates various elements such as a young gay man's diary from the early 1900s, a woman discovering reality-altering powers, and a historical confession from a waif who can manipulate reality. Ultimately, the thing itself is a meditation on perception, the limits of human understanding, and the consequences of accepting Kant's ideas that humanity can't access true reality, the thing itself, drawing us into a philosophical labyrinth. The Real Town Murders takes place in a near-future England, actually in my hometown, where most people spend most of their time in Shine, an immersive virtual reality. So much so that the real world is decaying around them, and the population is largely disconnected from physical life, leaving only a few dissenters like Alma, who's a private detective, to live in the real. Alma's partner Marguerite requires life-saving medical interventions every 4 hours, on the dot, putting some awkward constraints on Alma's freedom. Alma investigates a strange death at a fully automated car factory where a body appears in the boot or the trunk of a freshly made car. As she digs deeper, Alma uncovers a political conspiracy between the government of the real world and the administrators of Shine. Alma becomes entangled in a high-stakes thriller, evading arrests and uncovering the conspiracy, and racing against time to return to Marguerite before she dies. It's filled with action and suspense and unexpected plot twists. In a rare Roberts sequel, in By the Pricking of Her Thumb, Alma is still struggling with her financial troubles 18 months after the events of the Real Town Murders. Her partner Marguerite remains terminally ill and costing Alma a fortune in medical care. Alma investigates the strange death of Alexa Lund, whose thumb was punctured by a needle, and yet there's no poison or other evidence of foul play. And of course, she's still dead. This seemingly impossible crime challenges Alma's skills in solving bizarre cases and forms the first part of the novel's central mystery. Alma is also tasked with investigating a far more lucrative case involving the world's 4 wealthiest individuals, collectively known as the Fab Four. One of them is believed to be dead, with an imposter or AI version possibly replacing them, but no one knows for sure which one is missing. This second book has a darker, more serious tone, exploring themes of power and greed and the exploitation of virtual reality. But fear not, whilst tackling serious themes, the book is also peppered with Roberts' humour and witty dialogue. Whilst Adam doesn't usually do series, this next book is part of what will be a series of 4, with the writing duties shared with Dave Hutchinson, another British author. Hutchinson wrote the first book, Shelter, and the third, Sanctuary, and Haven is the second book. And I gather that there's a fourth in the works, which will also be by Adam Roberts, called Grail. I've really enjoyed all of these books, not least because they're all set mainly just up the road from me, in an area that I know very well indeed. They're all set about 100 years after the Sisters' comet fragments destroyed much of the world. Most people died, with only the hardy and resourceful surviving the next winter. 100 years down the road, then, we're spending time with their descendants. Haven centres around young, fork-tongued Davy. He has visions, or epilepsy as Mark calls it, so much so that he's barely able to help around the family farm. But something about the lad is attracting attention. There's the menacing stranger who might be the angel of death himself. There's the woman-only community at High Wycombe. And then there's Daniel, sent by the mysterious Guz. They all seem to want Davy for their own reasons. But what use can he be to anyone? He has visions of flight, but how can flight ever be possible in this shattered world? A simple farm boy, caught up in events beyond his power to control, but his visions may be the key to the future. Along the way, we get a look at how society, or rather lack of it, works in this world. And there are some sinister forces that are gathering strength for something. Here's another one that I've read. Purgatory Mount unfolds across 2 seemingly unconnected timelines. A near-future United States in turmoil, sounds familiar, and a deep future setting aboard the Forward, a starship crewed by near-immortal post-humans. After a century-long journey, the Forward arrives at a planet with a massive conical structure named Purgatory Mount that may or may not be a natural phenomenon. Back in the 2030s timeline, the United States faces political chaos, with California declaring independence and the nation on the brink of civil war. Teenager Ottie and her friends create a private internet to avoid government surveillance. One of Ottie's friends is not quite what they seem, and the US government begins to take a very close interest in them all, including capture and interrogation. And the book closes with a revelation which finally provides the link between the two timelines. This is a groundbreaking social media platform that uses implants to enable thought-based communication. Whilst it gains a massive following, critics label it a cult with potentially sinister implications. This is another story with two timelines. In the near future, journalist Rich Rigby is investigating this, whilst in a more distant future, humanity faces a war with a hive mind that's emerged from the platform. Like the thing itself, Adam Roberts draws on some philosophy, in this case from Hegel's concept of the world spirit. And the book examines how individuality, technology and collective consciousness intersect, highlighting the existential threat of a technological singularity. In The Lake of Darkness, his most recent book, we begin with two start ships. Yes, that's start ships, not starships. The Nero and the Oubliette, in orbit around a black hole. Attempting to extract data from the black hole, Captain Rain is influenced by a malevolent voice that seems to come from within the black hole. He becomes a serial killer, slaughtering both crews, setting off a chain of events that forms the rest of the story. Adam Roberts has a bit of a pop at the kind of utopian society that's often depicted in science fiction, and I'm looking at you, Ian M. Banks. In this post-scarcity interstellar society, humanity thrives in diverse fandoms focused on personal interests. However, this hobbytopia leaves humanity woefully unprepared to face true evil when it arrives. A historian hobbyist studying Rain's actions interviews him in a virtual environment only to be corrupted herself. Driven by an inexplicable compulsion, she pursues a device capable of destabilizing the black hole. Via the malign entity and the utopia's AIs, Roberts critiques humanity's decadence and dependency on tech, suggesting that their utopia has regressed into a form of lazy infantilization. To top that off, there are some memorable characters, including a deeply unpleasant 300-year-old scientist who might be the rudest character that I've ever read. My next challenge will be to decide which of the 15 or so that I haven't yet read should be next. I think I'm leaning towards Jack Glass, or This maybe, or Polystom. Really, I don't know. I'm going to have to pick one at random, I think. I hope you enjoyed that. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye for now.